The Irish Prison Service had to take the step of publicly issuing a warning last week following the death of a prisoner from a drug that's called Nitrazene. It is obviously something that they're deeply concerned about.
Yeah, it's one of these synthetic opioids like fentanyl. It's extremely strong. And the problem is that it's been mixed in with other drugs, so people don't actually know they're taking it. And I think the version of the drug that appeared in the prison estate that I think caused all the issues was basically being sold or passed around as benzodiazepine. So people thought they were taking benzos and were actually taking an opioid, which I suppose is even worse because these are people who may not even be, opioid users themselves, so they have no tolerance.
Yeah.
Plus, they're expecting to take a much weaker drug that has different effects. So it's doubly dangerous in that way, and it's extremely, extremely strong drug.
Now, in this case, of course, where the warning was issued after a young man, a 21-year-old from Darndale, Adam Darcy, was found dead in his cell. Adam Darcy was obviously a young man. He I think was serving a relatively short sentence for drug offences. Obviously, very tragic, and deeply concerning for the prison service.
Yeah, and they actually had there was another overdose, the double overdose in Cork in March, and I think there was a report into that. Nobody was actually named, but one man I believe died, and another was left seriously ill as a result of that. But there has been a number of overdoses that they believe is connected to nitrazene or nitrazene, depending what side of the Atlantic you're from.
Yeah.
And it's a serious problem. And I mean, it turned up in it turned up in powder form outside last year around December. There was clusters of overdoses in Dublin and Cork. And there was kind of fears, I think, that there was a drug dealer or two or somebody at some point in the system was experimenting to see how this would go. And it was being sold as kind of brown powdered heroin. And so people who are heroin users using it, had no idea that nitrazene is going to be contained in this, and wouldn't necessarily take any precautions in terms of maybe taking it slower, see how strong it was. The fact that these people would have had, I suppose, a tolerance built up, there was probably, in a sense, it could have been a lot worse in that regard.
Yeah.
The fact that you're dealing with people who already had, a heroin addiction, I suppose, protected them to some extent, believe it or not,
Yeah, because obviously that's the biggest risk of overdoses. People that go off heroin and then relapse, they can be at particular risk for an overdose. Like, actually, Seamus Boland, the head of the Garda Organised Crime and Drugs Bureau, he was in a rival podcast, let's say, but it's a Garda podcast that the guards are producing themselves. But he described, I think, 80 overdoses related to nitrazene over the last period of time. So, and it's fascinating, I suppose, how this is affecting now. It's affecting Mountjoy prison and a 21-year-old young man who tragically lost his life. But this is all being traced back to a degree to the Taliban cracking down on the sale of heroin in Afghanistan.
Yeah, the basically poppy production has been banned. And so, I mean, there was always a relative shortage of heroin throughout the world.
Yeah.
And Europe, I suppose, got first go. And that's why I think that the whole opioids epidemic, when it happened in North America, for the simple reason that there was never enough heroin to meet demand in North America. But yeah, the fear is it's only going to get worse. And I mean, I suppose the drug lords or the people involved in selling drugs, they're looking for ways to maintain their business. And the idea, to give you an idea, from what I understand is you've had illicit or underworld chemists are going back to, they're going back to papers and experimental work that was done by scientists in the 1950s, which is when nitrazene was first invented.
Yeah.
And, doctors or medics at that time were looking for alternatives to, non-plant-based painkillers, such as heroin, which is a painkiller.
Yeah.
They wanted something that didn't rely on poppies. They wanted to be able to produce it synthetically. And they basically, they came up with nitrazene, where I think it's made up of 200 compounds. And they decided it had so many nasty side effects and was so addictive that they said, no, it's not going to market. So, I mean, the pharma had, showed a certain amount of morality, and they'd find something better. It was far too risky. But the idea now that you have underworld chemists going back looking for these rejected opiates, or opioids, sorry, to try and look for a product that they can put on the market. It's just shows you the amount of money that's been spent in development and research by drug gangs.
Yeah, and I suppose the sophistication, and of course there is, because there's a number of heroin addicts, people who are addicted to opioids. I suppose they're going to need to take opioids every day. There is a market there no matter what, even if there is risks to health. So they know that those people need to be serviced, I suppose. I think they're saying the Taliban, of course, most of the heroin has traditionally been produced in Afghanistan, most of the worldwide supply, though I think there is heroin produced from Colombia and maybe in parts of Mexico as well. But the Taliban sort of turned a blind eye to it, at least in part when they were first in power. When the Americans obviously went in and took over Afghanistan, I think there was a boom because the Americans didn't particularly care if people were producing heroin as such, But when the Taliban came back into power after the withdrawal of the Americans, they seem to have launched this crackdown and really enforced it. And obviously, the Taliban enforcement is probably something to take quite seriously. So they reckon that 85% of the poppy fields in Afghanistan have been destroyed over the last few years, and it's just created this gap. But these replacement drugs, I mean, I know we give figures about how dangerous it is, but I mean, there seems to be a general, and we don't really know if it's 50 or 200. I mean, these things, what do they even mean? But you do know two things, that they say nitrazene is the most potent, even more potent than fentanyl. And we know the effect that fentanyl has had in the US in particular. I mean, the mortality rate has been incredible.
Yeah, the northeast of the US has just went through an incredible epidemic. And I think at the peak, was it in 2022 or 21, there was something like 80,000 overdose deaths directly related to fentanyl. Now it's dropped since. I think this year, I think the figure is 9,000 so far, which, is stunning. And and I mean, I think there was 250 overdose deaths were linked to nitrazene in the UK last year, in the second half of last year. So, I mean, the capacity for the drug to kind of cut a swathe through, a group of users very quickly is there. And if heroin isn't going to be made and isn't coming, there's going to be another nitrazene or another fentanyl or, alongside all of these. I mean, I think it's like in recent years, there's something like 900 synthetic drugs, everything from all the various cannabinoids and everything that's supposed to mimic the effect of whatever drug you want, being made in underground labs, in Europe, probably one in Ireland, I'm sure, or, or wherever. I mean, like the vast bulk we know of, some of these drugs are still being made in South America and they're being shipped across. And as we know, there's cases of large consignments on the way to Australia through Ireland. So, I mean, it's a massive business and it's going to continue. And it begs the question of where do you go? You couldn't have wished from an enforcement point of view, you couldn't have wished a better thing than shutting down the poppy fields of Afghanistan. And yet, lo and behold, you still have a drug problem.
You do. Now, I mean, the other thing that both the HSE and the guards have been very anxious to put across is the existence of a thing called naloxone, is it?
Naloxone, yeah.
Naloxone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a drug that I suppose it's an anti-overdose drug, I suppose, is one way to describe it. I mean, people have seen something similar maybe in Pulp Fiction, isn't it? I mean, I know
that was just adrenaline.
Was it? But
not to be recommended.
No, but it's where you're taking a drug to get the system to remove it from the system.
Yeah,
basically.
and Naloxone is a very safe drug.
Yeah,
and basically you can use you can inject, but if you're a medic. But ordinary civilians can use a nasal spray and spray it into somebody's into their nasal passage. And basically, the molecules from Naloxone basically replace the opioids or opiates that are shutting down the parts of the brain telling you to breathe.
Yeah.
So they literally come back to life.
Right.
And apparently Naloxone has saved thousands and thousands of lives in the US. And they encourage people who are addicts or people who live with addicts or work with addicts to carry these nasal sprays. I believe there's a program now, the HSE are rolling out Naxalone,
Yeah.
like, through their various partners, in drug services to make it available to people who may need it or may be in a position where they can use it, where it needs to be used.
And it is available, I suppose, is the thing, is that if people do ever come across this circumstance, the HSE will make it available, or the emergency services, and the guards also have the capacity to do it, don't they? Right now, like, it's not.
Yeah, I think, like, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I think if somebody has a relative or are working with people that are in danger of overdosing, they should really find a way of legally getting it. And I'm sure they can, because I'm sure you're better looking at it than looking for it if somebody is going blue.
Yeah.
Because it's a matter of seconds, or, it's like by the time a paramedic, even if they're there in 5 or 6 minutes, the amount of brain damage someone could suffer might be too much.
Yeah, and it really does seem to act as a miracle, and it really is incredibly effective. So I think the guards are, they have made that available, certainly in the North Inner City, and when we had this previous burst of Nitrazene overdoses. So people should be aware of that for sure.
Yeah. And the only way, though, to really safeguard, against drugs is not to use them, which sounds great when you're not an addict, and it's a kind of a, I suppose, tongue-in-cheek comment to some extent. And there is I think the HSE do testing. So, I mean, if somebody, has drugs or they want to give a sample, they can get it tested. And there is the various services you can do that. But often if you're a street addict, you're not going to give away even one tablet. So, I mean, it's kind of the privileged drug addict, someone who's got a slightly bit more resources, or, God forbid, there's an actual ethical drug dealer out there, which I'm sure there are. They might actually test some of their batches that they get supplied with, and just to make sure they're not going to kill their neighbours or whoever they're supplying to. Yeah,
but we've definitely seen in the US the danger of fentanyl, because it wasn't just that people were buying fentanyl, they were buying what they thought was MDMA or any other number of drugs, and there happened to be fentanyl in them. So that obviously is a huge problem.
And that's the key issue with the kind of the nitrazene overdoses in the UK and in Ireland, is that people thought they were buying something else. I mean, it's been here in powder form. People thought it was heroin, and in tablet form, they think it was benzodiazepine, and it turns out it was just nitrazene and mixing agents. There was nothing else in it. It was the only active drug was the nitrazene. So again, people with no tolerance to opioids, taking this are hugely at risk if they think they're taking something else that they're used to taking. And then, and HSE have put a lot of stuff out there, little yellow tablets, this particular batch. Again, that could change. It makes you wonder, because there was, I think it was earlier this year, there was a spate of deaths in Birmingham. You wonder, is a drug dealer somewhere down the line saying, get rid of these, I know bloke in Ireland who will take them, and try again, and sell them as something else. And so it's a real worry. And and as you say, with Taliban clamping down, it's potentially only going to get worse. And we're going to have to, the country's going to have to look, no more than other countries, going to have to look at the way we tackle drug addiction. And, I suppose the models of Holland and Portugal, where addicts are seen as a health issue, not a crime issue, that that there's resources put in to help people get off the drug. I mean, even the idea, years ago, I know in the UK, there was, they worked out that they had an experiment going for a number of years where there was a particular doctor, and he'd give heroin addicts heroin.
Yeah.
And most of those people were able to hold down jobs, and it was costing the National Health Service at that time $5,000 a year. So, I mean, and these people are still working and paying taxes. So, I mean, there needs to be a different approach. I'm not saying legalize it, but certainly decriminalization and all that. And we don't seem to have much of that debate in Ireland.
Well, I suppose we have had a bit of debate, but a lot of it has been focused on the use of cannabis, really, which is a different matter. And you do see a change in attitude, I think, even from the guards, even to hear sort of Seamus Boland talking about this, where I don't think that would have been like that in during the first two waves of the heroin epidemic, which really was a just say no kind of attitude from the state. So, but these are complex problems. There's no doubt about that.
I mean, the war on drugs, though, we know doesn't work. I mean, just clamping down doesn't work.
No.
I mean, even the fact that the Taliban are shutting down the supply and there's still people dying of overdoses show it doesn't work. And I mean, like Toronto, and I think it's Oregon, was one of the cities in Oregon in the US where we're kind of making they were making zones where it wasn't illegal to use or carry a certain amount of fentanyl. And their idea was, we'll see this as an experiment. Does the problem get worse or better?
Yeah.
And so the number of people dying from fentanyl overdoses, the rate of increase slowed down, but that's it. But there was no safety net. There was no aftercare. So it was just a matter of, you can come and get your drugs here.
Yeah.
And you know, someone will be tested, so you can openly use, and you can see which batch are dangerous. But that in itself isn't going to do anything. That's, you know, it's created its own set of problems, and it does need a kind of it needs a wider approach, that, you know, just simply doing the libertarian approach like in the US. Like, I was always amazed, like, you know, that kind of Holland was seen as I suppose the kind of, you know, the social caring country who, you know, it was always legal to go and smoke your cannabis there. And then it was the most kind of Republican states in the US, like Colorado, that were the first to legalize cannabis. But that was coming from a libertarian point of view. That's, you know, oh yeah, you can smoke your cannabis, and yes, your 5-year-old can have a machine gun.
Yeah.
You know, there was no sense of any kind of safety or kind of societal, I suppose, harmony or trying to keep, you know, people, you know, out of harm's way. It's like, you can do what you want, and if you kill yourself, tough luck, buddy.
Yeah, well, Ireland doesn't invest in health services. Shocker, I suppose.
Well, that's one of the other issues. I think we have a strong element, I suppose, of that libertarian sort of attitude in this country.
Yeah. Okay, Eamon, hopefully it's not a story we're coming back to, but I suspect it will be.
I think we will, unfortunately.
Thanks very much, Eamon.
Cheers, Niall.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.